This one bothered me the most. You're going for 2 late in the game, the way they did. And James Franklin was asked about this in the press conference, and I'm glad I didn't have to be the one to ask it. I didn't really want to get coach's reaction to this one because it didn't make any sense. And if you watch the press conference, it is up on the Locked On Nittany Lions YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, so you can listen to him back, you can watch it back. But Dave Jones from Penn Live did actually ask the question pretty directly. What was the reasoning? What was the logic behind? He asked about both 2-point conversions because you can. I scratched my head at the one where Penn State would have been down 14-10 had you just kicked the extra point. And then the one late in the game, same thing. Kick the extra point. It's 24-16. And you keep yourself in the game. So we'll start with the second 2-point conversion because I actually don't have that big of a problem with the first one, but you are taking that risk of playing from a different type of deficit. You are not playing from a traditional football score type of deficit. You're going into another one. Five points it's different. It's weird. It's not typical. The field goals, the way the touchdowns break, I'll explain that in a moment. Why he did that and why I don't disagree with it. But the second one I significantly disagree with, and I think that's. I know Penn State's playing from behind, but this one just was a huge mistake to me because it did so many things to the team in the moment. One, it takes you out of the game. First of all, it took you completely out of the game, even before the game was truly over. I kept saying on the sideline, I really hope I'm down on the sideline for the final 5 minutes of the game. I really don't want them to go for 2. I'm thinking I really don't want them to go for 2. They're not going to go for 2, right? They go for 2. It's 24-15. What does that do by going for 2? Because you still need a touchdown to tie the game. I know you need a 2-point conversion, but why not let yourself be down by 8, a score that you can tie, as opposed to being down by 9 with less than 2 minutes to go? Okay, game's still somewhat out of reach here. You're down by 8. Say it is 24-16. And this is what really, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I know it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to all of you. So I'm happy to have this discussion with any of you as well who want to join the chat. You're down 24-16. Let's set the stage again. For those watching the game, Penn State's still in it if it's 24-16. You have roughly 2 minutes in the game. You have 2 timeouts in college football. The defense, up until that point of having that short field and Blake Corum scores that, a 30-yard touchdown there, they held them to 17 points. Let me add on top of that, J.J. McCarthy is far from 100%. He's hurt. He's banged up. And no, it wasn't his shoulder. It wasn't his wrist. It wasn't his finger. It was his legs. I'm not a doctor. I've said that how many times, but he was clearly hobbled. He was not really moving the way he should be as a fully healthy quarterback. So J.J. McCarthy's whose legs bailed out Michigan more often than it should have throughout that game was now not a factor. So consider all of that. And Penn State, James Franklin, Mike Yurcich, everyone went into that decision making. The Penn State offensive collective said that we need to go for this. And I know that, and James Franklin's ultimately the one, right? He's the head coach. He makes that decision. He signs it. I don't know who had that input. Was it Mike Yurcich? Was it Danny O'Brien as well, right? Guys who are a part of the offensive system. How much input when they have that discussion in the moment? But James Franklin ultimately co-signs it. But remember, Mike Yurcich is calling the offense. He calls those plays. And if he feels like, hey, James, we should really go for 2 here, I have a play, James Franklin's got to veto that unless he goes up to the booth and calls up to the booth and says, we're going for it. Find your best play. Whatever it was, the offensive coaches really, really failed in this moment. You have 2 timeouts. You have 2 minutes. You have a Michigan team that you know is going to run the same type of running plays in those final minutes. Okay, you call your 2 timeouts. This is obvious. This obviously hinges on forcing a 3 and out. But I'm assuming that the defense does because you know where Blake Corum's going. You know where Donovan Edwards is going. You know that McCarthy is not as mobile anymore. You have 2 timeouts, and this isn't the NFL where the clock continues to wind, so you get the football back. A minute and 20 seconds in college football, that is what you hypothetically would have gotten the football back with. Maybe I'm splitting hairs here. Maybe it's 110. You definitely have over 60 seconds. You get Michigan at their 25. You force a 3 and out hypothetically, and then you get the football back with 120 to go and a chance to tie it, and anything can happen in college football. And remember, the clock stops under 2 minutes when the chains move on first down. So you still have ways to stop the clock. You can spike it. Time just doesn't accelerate as fast in college football because of those rules still. NFL's a little different, and it's a little tough. But I felt like that was the biggest mistake of the game. I know they were behind, but how could you just deflate your team like that and not give them a shot? Because when you don't get that 2-point conversion, and I don't even want to dissect what that play was. It's easy to sit in this chair and be an armchair offensive coordinator. It really is. But that reminds me of those like that Indianapolis Colts play where they just spread out all the offensive linemen. Michigan defenders are standing there. They're waiting. Do we attack Drew Allar? Do we stay back? There were too many Michigan players and not enough Penn State players because you sent all the Nittany Lions over to the far sideline to do what exactly? Distract Michigan. They were still outnumbered in the red zone there. And so the play call was not great. The going for it itself was not good. And that just was absolutely deflating. It could have been 24-16. I feel like you could have at least put yourself in a position to tie, and they didn't. And I don't know why you wouldn't do that in the game to save your season. And then James Franklin didn't have an explanation for it. He didn't answer it. He refused to answer it. I think it was right for Dave Jones to push for an answer and say, I don't understand why you're not acknowledging. And James Franklin said, I answered it. If that's genuinely how he feels, that points were at a premium and you needed to go for it there, I can't back up the logic. I really can't. And that's part of the mistakes. Being inconsistent. That's another one that I have on my list. But the biggest one of them all is absolutely deflating your team on the sideline and taking your team out of the game too early. The game was not over. You had 2 minutes. You had 2 timeouts. You would have been down 1 score and a 2-point conversion, and you decided to go for 2. You get it, fine. It's 24-17, but you still have the same scenario. You still got to drive down the field and convert a point after a touchdown. Yes, it's an extra point instead of a 2, but you still have to do the exact same thing. Stop Michigan on the 3 and out. So why take that scenario away to begin with, period? It's what's really frustrating, and I'm not entirely sure why it was made. I got a few other mistakes. I want to have this conversation with you. We're going to talk some comments as well. So let's take a look at the chat, and hopefully it's all friendly, right? I know that Michigan is giving me a hard time about this one. I believed in Penn State. I really did. You go back to Beaver Stadium. There was revenge on the mind for 18 rushing yards. They blow you out 41-17. It's absolutely embarrassing. You get a reality check from Ohio State. This game feels like it doesn't have as much pressure as the Buckeyes game did, but it still did because that's how we dubbed it, because that's the way it needed to. That's how it was framed, right? I framed this as a chance to save your season. There's a lot of pressure there. Michigan didn't feel any of that. Michigan didn't have anyone to prove wrong. Penn State did. Penn State had to prove everybody wrong. And unfortunately, after this game, they proved everybody right.